All right, let's talk about the people who are supposed to be the referees in the high-stakes game of global finance. They're the ones who are supposed to step in when things go wrong, but they're also the first ones we blame when they don't. We're talking about financial regulators.
And that is a huge question. Because when we're talking about trillions of dollars, and literally the stability of entire countries hanging in the balance, you'd better have somebody enforcing the rules. But who are these people really? And what game are they actually playing?
So that's what we're going to dig into. And look, this isn't going to be some dry, technical breakdown of banking laws. No, this is a story. It's about incredible pressure. It's about politics, conflicting loyalties, and the deep fundamental challenges that make being a financial regulator one of the toughest, most thankless jobs on the entire planet.
Okay, so let's dive right in. To really get a handle on the challenges here, we have to start with how people even think about what a regulator is supposed to do. And it turns out there are two totally different, competing ways to look at it.
So you've got this huge clash of perspectives. On one side, you have the economic view, which is pretty common in the financial world itself. They see regulators as just another player on the field, an opponent maybe, with no special moral high ground. They're just an obstacle. On the other side, you've got the political view, which sees them more like mediators, trying to find some kind of truce between the super powerful industry and the government. The key thing here is that neither view really says what regulators should do. It just describes what they often end up doing.
And this is where things get really messy, right? This brings us to the reality of politics. Because in the real world, regulators aren't just an idea in a textbook. They are actual people appointed by politicians, and they often come with their own deeply held beliefs and, their own connections. This system of political appointments can lead to some, let's just say, complicated situations. It really forces you to ask if a regulator is appointed by a politician whose campaigns are funded by the very industry they're supposed to be watching, well, who are they really working for? Let's look at a textbook example of just how blurry these lines can become. Okay, just walk through this with me. Wendy Graham is the head of the agency that regulates this stuff. Literally days before a new president comes in, she makes this last-minute decision to exempt a product that one specific company, Enron, is betting the farm on. Then she quits. And just 5 weeks later, she's on the board of directors at Enron. And if that's not enough, her husband, a very powerful senator, later helps pass a law that makes that exemption permanent. Now, to be clear, the source material points out that nothing illegal was proven. But wow, it is a perfect, almost unbelievable illustration of the revolving door between Washington and Wall Street.
Now, this quote, this comes from one of the most powerful and influential regulators in modern history, Alan Greenspan. He was the chairman of the Federal Reserve for almost 2 decades, from 1987 to 2006. And he wasn't just some bureaucrat. He was a true believer, an ideologue who was absolutely convinced that free markets, left to their own devices, were the ultimate public good.
And Greenspan's personal philosophy had enormous consequences. He actively fought against regulating derivatives, the exact financial weapons of mass destruction that blew up the global economy in 2008. But notice the incredible contradiction here. He preached about self-reliance for regular people, but time and time again, he used taxpayer money to bail out Wall Street. The point is, his personal ideology wasn't just an opinion. It directly shaped the rules of the game for everybody for decades.
But you know what? Let's just set the politics aside for a second. Let's pretend you have the most independent, well-intentioned regulator in the world. Even then, the job itself has these massive, almost impossible structural problems baked right into it.
I mean, let's just start with the obvious one. The companies being regulated are unbelievably powerful. They aren't just big. They are woven into the very fabric of our economy. And you never see that power more clearly than when a crisis hits.
So think back to Bear Stearns in 2008. It was about to collapse. Now, it wasn't even considered too big to fail. The problem was it was too interconnected to fail. To stop a chain reaction that could have wrecked everything, the U.S. government had to jump in and swallow this much in toxic assets, $29 billion. And that was just the warm-up act. A few months later, the insurance giant AIG was teetering, and it threatened to take the entire global financial system down with it. The government had no choice. It had to step in. And the total price tag to prop up just that one company, a mind-blowing $185 billion. But even that number just pales in comparison to the total commitment. When you add everything up, the capital injections, the guarantees, all of it,
The total amount the US government put on the line to keep the system from completely imploding was $12 trillion. That's the scale of power we are dealing with. That is the size of the monster that regulators are asked to tame. So this really breaks down why the job is so tough. First, you have this amoral culture. Rules aren't about right and wrong, they're just technical problems to be solved or gotten around. Second, finance is global, but regulators are national. That's a huge mismatch that lets firms just move their business to wherever the rules are weakest. Third, the system is just so complex and fast that regulators are always playing defense, reacting to the last crisis instead of preventing the next one. Fourth, the industry pays for the best and the brightest, so the regulators are constantly outgunned and one step behind. And finally, as we just saw, the too big to fail problem. The biggest banks know that if they get into trouble, they'll get rescued, which of course just encourages them to take even bigger risks.
So what happens when you combine all those political pressures with these massive practical problems? What happens to the players who actually try to play by the rules they think exist? Well, that brings us to a really sad cautionary tale from Germany.
So meet IKB. This was a traditionally small, careful, conservative German bank. See, in Germany, the culture is a little different. There's this expectation that you follow the rules, that finance should have the same ethical standards as everything else. And IKB operated with that exact mindset.
And look at the disastrous miscalculation this led to. IKB made two really basic assumptions. One, that the U.S. banking system was properly regulated, and two, that the U.S. rating agencies were actually competent and doing their jobs. They just couldn't imagine the kind of amoral, profit-at-all-costs culture we were just talking about. Both of their assumptions were dead wrong. And the result? They lost $15 billion on a $4 billion bank. They were completely wiped out because they trusted a system that was playing by a totally different set of rules. This quote from the source material just nails it. They were innocents abroad. They thought they were playing chess, but their American counterparts were playing a whole different game. One where the real rules, the unwritten ones, are set by the biggest and most aggressive firms on the field.
And really, that leaves us with the one big question that hangs over everything. This isn't just about writing better rules or hiring smarter people. If the core culture of the game itself rewards pushing every boundary and treating ethics as an inconvenience, can the referees, the regulators, ever do more than just show up to clean up the mess after the game is already over? It's a dilemma that sits right at the very heart of our modern financial system.